Hello everybody, Dokkan Assets here. Welcome back to another animation analysis video. Today we're going to be taking a look at the brand new side banner unit KRILLIN and Android 18. Obviously this video is ending up being a separate animation analysis video because well, the Gohan Beast video ended up being almost 2 hours long. Oh my gosh. That was quite literally a movie when it came to analyzing all of those animations. So I'm really glad that I didn't include KRILLIN and 18 in that video. So definitely go check out that video as well as the Gamma's video. Of course, that will be the last couple videos uploaded on the channel. And I also have some plans to do a superhero mega mix as well as some anniversary related mega mixes coming up. So definitely look forward to that. But with the KRILLIN and 18 animation, not only do we have the side-by-side comparison from the boy Kevin X, shout out to you, my goat, of course, link to my man in the description below. He does all kinds of these fantastic comparison videos. This one also has the Gammas. He just decided to include the KRILLIN and 18 animation in this one with the Gammas, and at the time that I recorded the animation analysis video with the Gammas, we did not have the frame-by-frame for the Gammas. So we are going to watch through those in this video because I mentioned in that video that you know, if he posted the video, you know, and then I did a update video essentially later, which is kind of what this was, right? A combination of, you know, looking at that and KRILLIN and 18, then we'll look at it in this video. So before we get into anything else, I always like to mention in these videos that I'm by no means an animation professional or an animator. I just like to look at these animations for fun, and obviously I look at rather the assets that make them up all the time, so I have a pretty good idea of what makes a good Dokkan animation. Now, obviously, these guys are the side banner unit for this celebration, right? So I don't expect them to be absolutely insane when it comes to their animations. Now, with that being said, I definitely want to see what these look like in comparison next to the movie, because I feel like overall they're not insane, and I feel like they're not as good as they could be. In my opinion, I feel like there's a lot of points in the animation where it's either just like them stopping in place or what have you. So I do want to actually watch the comparison video right now, just so that I have an idea as we go into it with analyzing, rather than usually we kind of do it after, because I feel like for this time it's kind of important for the sake of context, right? And I do know for this one, I believe obviously some of the angles are a little bit different for some of the things, but most of it, as you can see, is pretty similar, right? Now, it is kind of interesting, I will say, when it comes to this unit, right? The one thing that I think is probably the most like noticeable aspect of this is that KRILLIN is not wearing his helmet. And obviously in the anime, he is, right? And even in the card art, as you can see in the cut-in, he is. So it's kind of weird that in the animation, he doesn't wear the helmet. However, I'm pretty sure that the reason why they did that is because then they could just do a fluid animation of him basically just doing this entire sequence without having to animate him throwing his helmet off. Because as you can see here, right, they pretty much cut from him already having his helmet, or him having his helmet on his head rather, to then when they cut to the solar flare, he already has it off of his head in the Dokkan animation. I don't remember if it's like right in between that where he takes it off, but I'm sure that that's kind of why they did that, to make it a little bit more I was gonna say coherent and consistent at the same time. I combined the two words. But yeah, a little bit more, right, like make it make sense basically type of thing, where, because obviously it would be really weird if he was wearing his helmet in this shot and then, you know, like in the next shot afterward he doesn't have it on when he's doing the solar flare. So I think it's fine. It's kind of unfortunate that in the animation he doesn't have the helmet, but I don't think that it's that big of a deal, right? And I would definitely rather them do it this way if they were going to do something like this, because obviously then you know, it would basically just you know, make more sense and not be weird. So definitely I think it was a good choice on their part. Now, I will say that one thing that is kind of interesting to me about this whole sequence is some of the angles, right? Obviously, some of them are very similar to the movie, but you have shots like this where Krillin comes in from behind, right? From behind Android 18. And obviously that's not really what happens in the movie. And it's kind of ironic because I swear for this particular section, it's kind of like the parts that Dokkan added in that I feel like don't look as good and look kind of choppy, right? Obviously here you can kind of see the same similar thing in terms of the pose, but of course not the same angle. And interestingly enough, even for like the end, right, obviously we have this part here where, you know, we have both of them looking at the explosion, which I think is a cool little addition, right? Obviously this is something so simple and they didn't really need to do much for this, but it's just a nice little touch, and that should end up being the KO screen as well. Now, looking at this animation, right, I will say overall, I think it's all right. Again, I can never be as, you know, like kind of hard and critique these as I do for the Dokkan Fest animations, right, and the LRs, because obviously these guys are just a side banner unit. But when it comes down to it, I think it's pretty clear that they put the budget into the Gammas and into Gohan Beast compared to this unit, right? This part here is fine, but it doesn't really feel like that the Ki Blast is launching, how do I put this, like effectively or like meaningfully. This looks to me, right, like in the way that it's animated, it is kind of just a ball that then moves across the screen. They do have it kind of shift a little bit in size, which is nice, right, to give it a little bit of that dynamicness to it, right, where you can obviously see the Ki growing a little bit. But it kind of does just look like it is a ball that they're sliding across the screen, right, where if we go back and look at the anime, right, the other thing about this too is that it's really weird why they didn't do this, right? This is one Ki Blast that 18 fires off in the Dokkan version, but in the anime version, it's rapid fire Ki Blasts here, right? I don't know. It's really, really weird that they didn't do that. Maybe it's just because they were trying to make the animation more simple, but they could have easily just had her do a bunch of blasts, right? And I think the thing that is really clear to see, right, this we can definitely compare to the movie when it comes to how the blasts fire off, right? You can see that if we go forward, the blasts are there, and then they kind of disappear into pew. You can see the little puff of air, and obviously they become a lot more like slim, because obviously they're firing off in a straight line before hitting the enemy and then kind of exploding against them, right? So why they chose to just do one ball, I'm not really sure, and I think that's kind of another reason why it looks a little bit weird here, where it's just like, you know, the circle moves forward, right? It's just a bit strange, but the cloud of explosion looks fine. I know people have been talking about that shot from the essay. It does look quite funny with Cell Max basically jumping just at 18. It is a bit weird as well that they didn't animate her recoiling, right? You can see that obviously in the movie, right, of course she has this pose, but then when Cell Max is coming in to hit her, they have her actively recoil. So it's kind of weird that in the Dokkan version, they didn't have her do that. They literally just have the PNG still be there. And then they, of course, have the scene where 18 is reacting like, uh-oh, I'm about to get hit. Which that part, I think, is definitely one of the better looking parts of this animation, right? Where obviously it looks, you know, a lot more like accurate to the movie, and also just looks pretty good in general. Here, again, I feel like this is just another case of the Ki Blast looking kind of weak when it comes down to it, right? Like, it just doesn't have a lot of impact to it. It doesn't have a lot of oomph when it hits the enemy. And I think the other thing that is definitely a bit weird about these, and is certainly a little off-putting, is that these are definitely more in a 2D art style, when obviously, right, when you're looking at the movie, right, of course it is in that CG 3D art style. So even though you can see that they definitely do a good job trying to replicate it, right, and it does look quite similar to it, you can kind of tell that, right, it is just a little bit of a different thing where your brain goes, oh, hey, wait a minute, that's not what I'm used to. Now, I will say, this shot of Krillin coming in is okay, but it is pretty clear that, again, this is just like a PNG sliding in. It definitely works for what they're trying to accomplish here. I think it's just at this point, my brain, because, and this could definitely just be me for sure, but you know, looking at this, I'm like, oh, okay, they're just sliding a PNG on the screen rather than Krillin coming in. However, I do like this bit of perspective where they cut from this shot of Krillin kind of coming behind 18 to then obviously having him fly up to her in this shot here. That is a pretty cool little bit of consistency. I do like that they're trying to kind of, you know, do that and have the animation be a little bit more fluid rather than just cutting from, you know, the Kienzan hitting cell max, right? Like, let's go back to that there, right? Having it just hit the enemy and then immediately cutting to this shot of Krillin. Even if it's not my favorite in the way that it's animated, I would much rather them have this in-between shot of Krillin to kind of establish that he's coming into the frame to keep the continuity. That's the word I was looking for before. The continuity, you know, with the animation flow a lot better. So I definitely like that from that perspective, right, of keeping a lot more cohesive. You do have a little bit of a pose jump there with Krillin, but it's not too crazy, right? That's definitely a little bit of a nitpick on my part. And this definitely looks a lot more like superhero-esque in terms of the art style, right? It looks a little bit more similar to the CG models and some of the other stuff. I do like the minimal movement that they do have on Krillin and 18 floating there a little bit too. Looks very nice. And obviously then we get the card art with the both of them. It looks great, by the way. I do love this card art a lot. And this shot looks great, I will say. The solar flare, I think they cooked, right? They definitely cooked on this. And I mean, obviously, this is the main part that they should have cooked on because, of course, this is like the highlight, I guess, for Krillin in the movie, right? Like the main thing that he does to contribute in the fight anyway, right? Obviously, blinding Cell Max. That is pretty cool. And again, looking at it in comparison to the anime, it is so cool always seeing how much detail they pack in, right? Because holy cow, dude, they did such a good job. Like, it's not as, like, I guess, like light where it's almost kind of like blurry in front of Krillin, but they definitely did a very good job, right, emulating this, I think. And even the, like, shot from the back, right, where you have Krillin blasting him, I kind of like, honestly, in the context of Dokkan, I think the yellow works a lot more to have the entire screen be yellow than have this kind of, like, brown, like mucky background, because obviously for the movie and in context that makes sense. And also they probably did that because obviously in the film they can have Cell Max, you know, have the light like reflected against his body, but obviously in Dokkan the sprites don't have the ability to do that because, of course, another certified stinky sprite moment. So I think that in that way, right, they did a good job, you know, choosing to make the background yellow because then it kind of contextualizes the scene a lot more, you know, and makes it like make more sense in, you know, what you're looking at. I will say it is kind of funny that they just then cut from Krillin doing the solar flare to then 18 holding the ki blast behind her, but I guess the implication, right, is that Krillin obviously launched it, and then 18 is going to attack with Krillin afterward. It's kind of interesting. This is another sort of case where, I don't know, I don't even know if I would call it what they usually do, but obviously when I talk about this, usually it's almost like an alternate version of events where, you know, an attack that a character does that doesn't actually hurt the enemy or doesn't do anything at the end of the day, you know, ends up like defeating the enemy in Dokkan. And here they kind of do a little bit of a different thing where obviously, you know, after the solar flares launched, of course, you know, what happens next is not 18 looking around where, you know, she can fire the ki blast, right? Obviously, it goes into a different scene. So it's kind of interesting that they spliced the movie together in that way to then create this different scene of obviously 18 charging it up. And I do like that they do have Krillin come up from this side of the screen because it kind of makes a little bit more sense on your brain, right? Obviously, he's over here and up in the air. So then having him come in like that is definitely a good, like, oh, you know, you can kind of imagine that since they cut to that angle, it makes sense that he's coming up from there. It is kind of unfortunate that this is just a PNG. Again, right? I would have loved a little bit of minimal movement on this. I feel like sliding PNGs like this are just kind of unacceptable in Dokkan, no matter if this is a Sideburner unit or not in 2024. But I understand why they did it, right? I suppose in that way it kind of makes sense. The effects, I will say, on the Kienzan are pretty cool looking. And when they do throw their attacks, right, they obviously have a pretty big pose change there, but of course, you know, in the context of the moment, it makes a lot more sense because obviously, you know, they're throwing it forward quickly. By the way, I do like the lighting on Krillin and 18 here too. Obviously, they have the light a lot more showing on the back of them because, of course, you know, that's where the, you know, energy that they're holding is. And then obviously it's darker in the front before then they do launch it forward. It's a little bit weird that Krillin is then just completely dark. Like, he is a little bit lighter on the front, but he's not as bright as he should be, I feel like, as this kind of flies away. They do twist him a little bit, and they do have a little bit of, again, nice minimal movement on him. And in the background, you can see 18, right? fires her blast a little bit later, but the same thing, basically bringing it forward, and then it just kind of moves off. Again, though, it's so slow in the way that it moves. Like, it looks very similar to how it moved in the beginning of the animation too. This part is pretty cool, obviously, with the Kienzan and 18's attacks combining, right? I do like that little effect. I do think that in terms of that, right, this looks a lot more like, I don't know, I swear the effect should have been like thinner on the edges of this or something like that, because I feel like the orange almost looks more like fire rather than it does like the key, how it does in the movie. Again, that's definitely some minor nitpicks on my part, but overall, I think it looks pretty good. And then obviously you have the Kienzan slam into the enemy, which the effects there look amazing. I love the little like sparks that they have going everywhere there. That part is definitely awesome, and I love the red effect that they have there. Is the red effect there when it hits Cell Max in the movie? Oh yeah, okay, so that's a really cool way to do it, actually. As you can see, it's red when it knocks against his head, but they use that in a more meaningful way in Dokkan to kind of drive home the Kienzan hitting them and obviously the explosion. That's pretty cool. I definitely like that a lot. Alright, so that's basically it for Krillin and 18. Obviously, though, since I didn't get a chance to look at it before, I did want to look at the Gamma's animations compared to each other, because obviously, you know, this one was definitely my pick for probably out of the 4 big boy anniversary units. These guys probably have the lowest on the totem pole, so I definitely wanted to see what they look like in comparison to the anime. It's hard to see, but they're actually punching the barrier. Oh, interesting. Okay. I see. So it's supposed to be that part where they're punching through the energy on screen. Okay. Yeah. Oh, interesting that they take from that shot of Gamma 2 there. Yeah, there are like a bunch of different attacks. Usually I have to trim down the anime, but in this case I had to slow it way down. What caught my eye was the difference in the brightness. Yeah, that was one thing I noticed with the Gammas, is that all of their effects were like toned down when it came to like the actual, like, you know, visual effects on the screen. I swear in the movie a lot of this stuff was really brighter, and definitely here you can see that that is on display for sure. I do think that they did a good job though stringing together a bunch of these different attacks. A misalignment. Oh yeah, I see that circle should be what he's talking about here is the circle on the boot. Let me go back to that. The circle on the boot. YouTube is doing me so dirty right now, bro. The circle that's you know, like the darker blue flame there should be more of a circle around his foot rather than kind of around him. All right. But yeah, this looks pretty cool. The effect loops 2 times. Interesting. Yeah, it is the same effect, whereas you can see there, right? They kind of have what is exploding against Cell Max when it actually lands against him, right? Just kind of play the same thing twice. That is interesting. And also, the movie definitely has a very interesting difference, because obviously this again is another case of what I was talking about before, where when you have a character that like their attack works rather than in the film it doesn't, and here you can see obviously right, he just gets tossed away, whereas obviously in the Dokkan version the kick is actually successful. So I guess that makes sense why the kick doesn't feel as impactful, because they didn't have a reference to take it from for that particular angle. That is pretty cool with the little wind trail there. But yeah, yeah, obviously this scene, right, pretty apparent that they took from that. I think, again, like I said, even with this animation too, they definitely did a good job stringing together all these different attacks from all these different scenes in the Dokkan version to make them feel very cohesive in the way that they, you know, like flow into each other for sure. Yeah, this looked pretty good. That is really interesting that they're not battle damaged. That is really interesting. I feel like they should have done that. I feel like that's such a missed opportunity, because it's like, I understand that like in their card art they're not battle damaged, I guess, but like you would think that, because obviously this happens after they've been on the playing field, and obviously this then goes into the standby skill, so it makes sense if like they had scuff marks and stuff, and it'd just be more accurate to the anime. I don't know why they didn't do that. And it's not like it's funny fruit punch, which Dokkan is very like iffy about whether they like to put on their characters or not, but obviously these guys are robots, and this is just scuff marks, so it doesn't really matter anyway. I don't know. Very weird. Also, the dust cloud effects in the background are definitely a lot better in the movie version. I think that much is definitely pretty clear, right? It's almost just like a solid brown background, and then there it's just kind of like a stable thing. Also interesting that this one he's already glowing, that they took that scene from, so it's kind of a little bit out of order. Yeah, they definitely did a good job here right? For sure. It is kind of interesting to see, though, again, they made, like, the Dokkan version, like, darker for some reason. I don't know why. It still looks really good, right? And I like the way that it ended up. But it is really weird that the movie is just so much brighter in that regard. All right. So moving on from that, obviously the effects at play here, though, look fantastic, right? And again, much like Sleeping Beerus, I know where the budget went. Even with the movie footage slowed down, there's so many frames that were skipped. Interesting. Yeah, they definitely did a good job, though, here in the Dokkan version. And again, I think the main thing that also makes this feel a little bit weird... Oh, interesting. That's when 18 is looking at him there. The other thing that I think is a little bit weird about this too is that I know that they tried to do the style here, right? It's pretty clear that they tried to like emulate the style of the movie in terms of like the CG, but I think that they look a lot more 2D animated and a lot more Dokkan-esque than they do how the Gammas look for like the TURs, right? Like the Dokkan Fest ones. It kind of seems like they went for a little bit more of a mix between the Dokkan art style and the like CG, you know, esque looking characters for this, rather than going full on with the CG, which is kind of interesting that they did it that way. And I'm sure that that's another reason why people are so off-put by Gohan Beast as well, because it was weird seeing him in like the 2D art style, when obviously we've really only seen him in the CG from the movie. But this does look really good overall. I think they definitely did a good job cooking with that. And it is really funny to see. I believe that shot right there, correct me if I'm mistaken in the comments, this is when he goes up, but I think this is when he's just about to launch, is it not? So it's kind of interesting that they put it in there. And obviously this shot right here is a completely different contextual scene right here, right? Obviously when he's looking at him and then he gets angry, right? He's like, let's go, right? That's when they charge in, right? That's not when, you know, obviously it's not after Gamma 2 activates the core breaker, right? It's a different scene in the movie. So it's kind of interesting that they spliced that in there at the end. But yeah, then for this animation, right, obviously, again, it is that same thing. Oh, okay, that's cool that they threw in a couple references to his fight with Gohan. Enemy sprite, yeah. I don't know why, you know, oh, man. I get it. I know why they do it. It's not I don't know why. It's just I don't like that they do it this way, right? Like, I get it that it's Cell Max, so he has to be fighting him because that's the enemy who they're fighting in the scene. But, man, it just stinks that sometimes stuff like this gets covered up. It looks good though, with at least a little bit that you can see there. Also, I did not know that. I'll have to ask Thieving 6 why the Dokkan Wiki stopped enabling us to download the animation assets. I'm not sure. I didn't actually even know you could do that, to be honest with you. But anyway, Thieving 6 goated, by the way. But very cool, obviously, with the little swing around for the animation here. Okay, so we have this repeat, right? And of course, this scene from before. Oh, Cell's giant stuff prevents me from seeing the entire thing, but this pose belongs to Gamma 2 somewhat. Yeah, it's kind of close. It's a little bit of a different angle, I suppose. It's kind of interesting that they combined some of the parts. Yeah, so this was somebody, by the way. Let me finish my first thought before I go into this. It's interesting that they took some of the parts where it's like the other Gamma fighting, but then they used it for the other Gamma in the Dokkan animation. I do think that's kind of cool, and that's a good way to do it, because obviously, I mean, like, they had the same build, so you might as well. This right here, with the slap, right, against Cell Max, somebody in the comments section of the Gamma video, I don't remember who it was, but thank you for commenting this. If you were the person and you're watching this video, definitely leave a comment down below. But somebody was like, yeah, this looks so weird, you know, and you were like kind of confused about that because it's from this particular scene. So thank you for clarifying that, right, where he obviously pushes him away a little bit. I was like, okay, yeah, that makes a lot more sense. It's just kind of interesting that they used it in a different context almost, where it was just like mid-attack, right, where he then smacks him away, just to kind of cram a movie reference in there. Like, I appreciate that, but at the same time, I feel like that's one instance where I would almost prefer Dokkan to just like kind of do their own thing when it comes to the animation, and maybe just make it more like a punch, because I feel like in the context of what's happening, it would have made a little bit more sense for it to be a punch. But I guess it still works, obviously, slapping the enemy away, because then, you know, it leads into, of course, the attack. Oh, interesting. Interesting. Okay, so hello, Gotenks. I know that this was something that I talked about in the video with the Gammas, where I was kind of like, it's really weird that they just kind of faded in the asset for like the big swirly effect here. I do still think it looks a lot better in the movie version. It's also weird that they didn't put a little bit more bright colors on him to then reflect like the energy charging there. But I guess they did a little bit afterward, but it's still not as bright as it is in the movie. It's so weird that I swear they like diluted a bunch of the colors of the gammas. So it's really interesting here because I feel like I understand why they did like the fade asset here a little bit more now, because obviously this was kind of like off screen a little bit more. And obviously when it comes to this asset, right, it kind of just like in the movie, it sort of just appears like that. But it's still kind of weird that they had it fade in. Maybe it would have been looked weird like that in Dokkan too. I don't know. Maybe the devs were thinking that if they just had it pop in, it would have looked a little bit weird. But obviously it's moving so quickly that I feel like it would have been fine. I know that's ironic considering most of the time I would be like, yeah, no, that's a no-no when it comes to the animations. But yeah, I don't know. Like, they did a good enough job replicating this, but I feel like, I mean, obviously it's going to look better in the movie, right? Like, I know I'm saying that, like, when I'm comparing, like, oh, the Dokkan version doesn't look as good. Well, yeah, no, duh, it's the source material, but, like, I don't know. It's still weird that they had, like, the assets fade like this in between when in the movie the, you know, energy blast just sort of grew properly. Very weird. That does look like a DBZ era explosion. I didn't even notice that. It definitely does. It's kind of weird. But yeah. Alright, so here is the actual core breaker. Now, this was, the budget has returned! This was definitely a part that I really wanted to, you know, talk about and see the comparison video too. Because it's very interesting that, you know, obviously you can see that they did a pretty good job emulating it, but even with some of the stuff, right, like the effects look a lot more like the edges are more defined almost on like the part where it's like circling around him. Oops, I did not mean to type in the bar. Hey, look, that's me with slashes. But like, yeah, the effects are a lot more like shapes, where it looks less like aura and just like somebody's photoshopping these shapes over it to look like the aura rather than it actually feeling like it, which is kind of weird. So I was really actually curious because I think you know, everything up until like when he finally goes down is pretty good, right? Like everything in this section looks really, really nice. And I love all of this, right? I think they did a very good job with it. However, here is the weirdest part to me, right? So I want to go back and actually get this slow-mo from this point in the animation. So I think with all of the effects and whatnot that they have at play for the part where he is charging up in space, right? I think all of that looks fine. It looks pretty good, right? Again, like I'm saying, the movie version definitely looks better, but again, it's the movie. It's the source material. Of course it's going to look better, right? Maybe they just didn't know how to get these exact like effects or something like that, because I swear Dokkan has done effects like this in the past. So it's kind of weird that it doesn't look more like the film, to be honest with you. But when we get to this part, right, this looks good with the sky opening up. However, you can see that they opt to kind of fade for this asset rather than having the sky open like this in a circle. And I know that they've done that before because I remember seeing it in a previous asset where the sky opens like how it does in the movie. So it's also kind of interesting too. They don't have the light that is Gamma 2 pop in until like a little bit later, and they also have it white instead of blue, which is really strange there for this part. Now, I think the fire effects and everything look pretty good, right? That all definitely makes sense to me. And the blue, again, is definitely not as bright and not as defined, which is really disappointing because that was honestly such a highlight of this scene. But we have this part with obviously Gamma 2 charging down at the enemy, right? Which is kind of unfortunate that, you know, of course, stinky sprite moment. You can't have the sprite really react, so it's just like the back of the sprite standing there. And this was one thing that I talked about actually on Twitter when I was discussing these guys' animations that I just find really weird, personally. That was just like, why did they do this in terms of just like a decision? So the big thing that I think with the comparison between this is two major things, right? One is a little bit more inconsequential, and that's the angle, right? It's almost like a little bit more of a front-on angle on the Dokkan version, where on the anime version, right, you can see that it's a little bit more like his head is tilted down slightly. It's such a minuscule difference that I don't think it's anything that crazy, but it is there, right? You can see that the shape of his head does look a little bit different. Now, I think the thing that is really the most off-putting for me about this animation is the background on this scene. Obviously, here in the movie, right, the background is very blue, right? Obviously, dark blue into the light blue aura around him, right? And obviously, even some more hints of dark blue towards the top of his head in the movie version. But in the Dokkan version, they opt to still kind of have that light blue aura around him, but then do the brown sky behind him. Now, it's kind of weird because it makes sense that the sky would be that color behind him, right? Like, obviously, up until this point, right? Looking at this, right? Of course, the sky is super dark. And if we look at, like, the rest of these animations, right? Obviously, the sky is kind of this, like, purple-gray color, you know, for the, you know, like, entirety of the animations that the Gammas have basically had up until this point, right? So it kind of makes sense, I suppose, that the color would look like that, because obviously, right, like, it's not wrong. But if we go back to that, right, it's just really weird, because I know for some people it might not be that big of a deal, but, like, the blue all around Gamma 2 just makes this scene so much more cooler and so much more impactful and so much more memorable. I remember this scene so much, not just because of how intense it is and how awesome it is, but that blue is something that is super striking in my memory, right? It's the same reason why a lot of the blue Gogeta fight is so memorable, is because all of the crazy blue aura effects that Gogeta has, you really remember that in your mind. You remember how cool that looks in the scene, and it kind of looks like that the Dokkan one is just a watered down version of the anime in this case, right? Where, you know, either Dokkan is so good at replicating the anime or sometimes even making it look better than the anime version. It's really a shame and kind of just so weird here that, right, the background looks like this, because I feel like it takes away a lot from this scene, right? And what is really ironic about my whole explanation of everything here, right, is that also they kind of don't do the yellow. I'm assuming, like, the yellow that, you know, is obviously on the movie version there is kind of supposed to be like those brown stripes, then the yellowish colors that you can see kind of moving around, but it definitely doesn't feel the same, right? Now, when we get to this shot, right, like, this looks fine. Also another stinky sprite moment with obviously the sprite kind of standing in front of the effect, but, you know, it's whatever. The explosion also looks pretty good, but again, it's not blue. I don't know why they took out so much of the color. The impact frames, though, fantastic, right? Obviously, yeah, definitely looks very complicated to draw, but they definitely cooked, right, on the Dokkan version. Very similar to the original source material. But we then go to the next shot of Gamma 2, right? When it's that shot from the side, I believe is what's coming up next. Yeah, again, like, so much less blue. Here, this part looks just fine. I will say, it is a little bit weird that they don't have the glow on his eyes. It quite literally just looks like in this particular scene that his eyes are all yellow, rather than, you know, they keep it consistent in the movie where obviously before his eyes were glowing and you can see they are still glowing. And I know that that's an effect that Dokkan can do because I've seen them do it before with other things. But this looks fine for the colors, right? You can see the dark blues, the light blues, everything cooking, right? You can definitely tell that the colors on Gamma 2 himself, like on his dome, don't look as good, right? Because there's those, like, you know, that, like, light tint of blue all around him, and, right, the light kind of, like, reflecting off of his dome, where it definitely kind of looks like that that's not as much the case, and it's just this, you know, like, regular colored Gamma 2 that's being surrounded by this light, rather than it being, like, reflected off of him. Because obviously my boy got a literal chrome dome, being an android. But this shot looks so much better in terms of the background, right? And they do a pretty good job of the expression, too. It's not exactly the same as the movie, but it's very... The difference is so slight that it's negligible, right? But the background is really good here. Like, this looks so much better, right? With all these different blues. Again, it's not as crazy as the movie, but it still looks really good. So, why do they nail the background here? But then, moments earlier for this shot right here, they do this. So weird. Like, I almost wonder if it's something to do with, like, they can't have, like, that many bright lights on the screen or something. But there's so many more instances of Dokkan essays where, like, the lights are just so crazy and bright with all the effects in your face. I don't know. maybe they was just too bright. It's just so weird that they decided to kind of execute it in this way, right? Like, I don't think what's in the Dokkan version looks bad by any means, right? It just definitely isn't as good as I want it to be. I think is like the end-all be-all. Interestingly enough, on the podcast with the boy Mas Ningen, he was mentioning to me too, it's like, it looks really good, but I feel like it's not as good as I expected it to look, and I think that is definitely a sentiment that I share for sure. So this shot here too, again, looks very good, but again, very much so more blue in the anime version. I feel like I'm a broken record, I'm sorry. But they do try and keep, it seems, a little bit more of that purple background in the Dokkan version. I do love this part though, holy cow, they cooked. With the effects at play though, I will say that is all very good, right? Taking away from the color, right, is one thing, but dude, the rock effects and the lighting and everything, and obviously this part blurring at the same part as the movie, that is super cool, right? Obviously the little bits of white that kind of come up from the ground, and then when the color changes to black and white, and then this big effect here, right, where obviously it's like he's beginning to explode. This part is awesome, and they do a great job of it in Dokkan, right? It's definitely a little bit different than the anime, but I think both work really, really well. And in this case, I don't really think either one is better than the other. I think they both look really good. Maybe the, like, dust cloud in the anime is better for this one, but I think in terms of the effects, they both look really good. And, interestingly enough, again, slightly bit of a different angle here. Like, it is basically the same. It's the slightest difference, but I think what really makes you think that this is a different angle, where it maybe isn't as much so, is the fact that this is vertical, right? I think that is one thing that definitely makes your brain go, huh? When you're looking at these animations sometimes, is that you're seeing it from a bit of a different perspective in how much you're seeing and in what way you're seeing it, because obviously the movie is horizontal, right? It's 1080 by 920, right? But in Dokkan, right, obviously it's a vertical video, so you see more up and down when it comes to these scenes. So that is also why this shot probably looks a little bit more weird, because obviously you're seeing more length of Gamma 2 here. Now, why they didn't zoom in more to be a little bit more closer to his face, I don't know, because it is a bit weird seeing the edges of his fists, and I feel like that's only weird because obviously in context, this is where he would be, you know, smashing into Cell Max, so his fists would either be, I guess, you know, if it's kind of like Superman posing, obviously, right? If he's like, you know, his energy is kind of like bouncing against Cell Max almost as he's trying to push down into it, then I guess it makes sense, but I would think his fist would almost be like resting against Cell Max more. Regardless, though, it is still very weird to see from this angle, but this does look really good. The only thing that I think they could have done a little bit better on this part is the lineage that they have on Gamma 2, right? You can see here in the movie, there's all these super dramatic lines that they have on him, and that is basically not even present in the Dokkan one. It is basically just the fire, and the fire looks good, but it's a bit of a shame that they don't have those intense lines, because that's something that makes the scene so memorable. And then, they do a good job of this part, right? When he disappears, it's a little bit more white, because you can tell that this asset is a white asset, and they're just kind of having these like little red effects from the fire going over it, rather than obviously, you know, in the movie they make the whole thing that color. But I think this part's really well executed. Obviously with him fading away, it looks a little bit different, and obviously there's a little bit more dynamic colors in there, where it's not just like black and white. You can kind of see it, there's a little bit more color dancing in there. But again, I think the Dokkan version does a good job of it, and of course we then get the explosion at the end, right, which I think does look pretty good with obviously the rocks and everything billowing up from the end, right? And it is kind of interesting too, because this shot here, they obviously put Gamma 1 there, but then in the Dokkan version, or in the anime rather, obviously this is when KRILLIN and 18 are looking at the explosion. Obviously it's just using this particular like smoke as reference, so I think that's fine. And I do like the transition a lot here, actually. That's definitely something to note, where, you know, the explosion happens and it's like from this particular angle, so it wouldn't really make sense just to cut to the next angle. So they have the dust cloud cover the screen and then, you know, kind of fly away, and then it goes to this angle from behind Gamma 2. So that is very, very interesting there. I definitely like that transition a lot more than just a cut. But yeah, let's see what iKevinX had to say before we finish up the video for today. This is such a funny angle. Oh, man. Gammas are amazing. The Gohan was amazing. Gogeta and Broly were amazing for this. I was almost prepared to get 17 vs 2 and Legends if needed, but they managed to squeeze in everything for the movie. Honestly, don't know how to top this anniversary. Yeah, for sure. Now, if you excuse me, put ice on my wrist before I return to editing Beast Gohan. That's funny. Thank you, my boy. Yeah, like, it is clear to see, right, especially looking at the end of this video, right? It's very clear to see that they definitely did a very good job when, you know, like referencing these things from the movie, right? They definitely did a very good job. And like I always say, right, I feel like, unfortunately, this is something that's kind of common in the Dokkan community in general, I feel like, unfortunately, and it's just something that I feel like I have to clarify every time. It's like, when I say that, oh, this animation could be better, oh, rest in peace to go. When I say, oh my gosh, why did you have to play the scene on Kevin X? Oh my gosh, I didn't want to cry today. Let me go back and play the video. Oh man, that caught me off guard. I ain't even gonna hold you. When it comes down to it, right, obviously, right, talking about 18 and Krillin, they, again, for the sake of it, right, are pretty good. They are a side banner unit, so obviously I can't critique them, you know, too hard. I think they maybe could have done a little bit of a better job, but I, you know, would much prefer that obviously they put the budget into the big boy units for sure. When it comes down to, though, obviously the Gammas, right, I think that they still did do a very good job of replicating, you know, the movie, right? They still did a very good job getting all the references that they could and, you know, taking some things directly and obviously ad-libbing some stuff and, you know, obviously, you know, getting all of the core stuff that needs to be there in there. But I think it's still clear that they could improve these in the future if they ever did do this again somehow. I don't know when they would. It would definitely be a long ways down the line. And, you know, I think overall, they did a really, really good job with these guys for sure. It is, again, I think just another case of, you know, unfortunately, it just seems like to me, right, when it comes to most of the Carnival units, there's just these slight things about them that they could be better, and that the Dokkan Fest versions, or well, I guess the Dokkan Fest counterpart of whatever is the, you know, like Carnival LR, just like the Dokkan Fest in general for the LRs, most of the time just have higher quality animations, and which is so weird because, you know, you would think that wouldn't be the case because obviously, you know, these guys are also just supposed to be a different type of premium unit, right? So they should be on the same level of quality, right? Now, obviously there are outliers to this, right? You know, Gogeta, Future Gohan, right? Even to an extent the Super Saiyan Trio. But I think they all still have small things that could be improved and maybe wouldn't be there if they were Dokkan Fest units. But that is all to say, though, that again, and my whole original point that I got away from, I'm glad I remembered it, I almost forgot it, is that the thing that kind of stinks is something I see so frequently in the Dokkan community, is the fact that, like, when you say something like isn't as good as it could be, or isn't as good as something else, that automatically makes it bad. When it comes to the Gamma's animations, right, I like these animations. In fact, I like them a lot, right? It's kind of hard not to, right? They're really cool, and obviously being a fan of the Gammas, right, obviously it's easy to like these animations because, you know, they're just really cool. But obviously, right, it kind of stinks when it sort of gets twisted. It's like, oh, well, you know, obviously I'm trying to analyze, excuse me, these, and look at these from a more critical standpoint, right? Obviously critiquing them in any way that I can. So of course it's going to sound like, you know, oh, I'm being a little bit hard on them, or I might be dogging on them. But I also don't want it to come off as like I don't like them, because I do, right? Obviously, I feel like when it comes down to it, a lot of the time, unfortunately, a lot of the time, I just said that twice. I'm sorry. I'm trying to collect myself here. When it comes down to it, right, most of the time I end up seeing people take somebody saying, oh, this isn't as good as it could be, or this isn't as good as this, or, oh, you know, this thing could be better, or whatever, and then that automatically makes it bad. So I don't want you to take that, you know, as me calling these animations bad. I just think that they could be better. But I do really like them. I like them a lot. I think they did a very good job with them. So, and obviously, it's very cool to see the Gammas as anniversary characters. I definitely wouldn't have expected that. Like, Gohan Beast, maybe, but, like, the boys? Oof. Very, very cool to see them as anime characters. So I think overall, when it comes down to the animations from this anniversary, they did a very, very good job, right? I think all of the characters were definitely done justice, right? Obviously, there's always things that they can do better, but I think for the most part, they definitely cooked on the animations, especially for the big boy units. We may still get some kind of surprise LR, obviously. You know, I know in the past, I kind of forgot about these guys, but the funny GT Juniors, right? Goku Jr., Vegeta Jr. That was just like a surprise LR in a part 3, or maybe the EX part, I don't remember, but in a previous anniversary. So maybe we'll get another free-to-play LR that we'll still have another animation to do a animation analysis video on for this anniversary, but we'll see what happens. So with all that being said, thank you guys so much for watching this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you did enjoy. And as always, links to everything that we took a look at in the description below. Again, please go check out the boy iKevinX. He makes fantastic content, so I always like promoting his stuff. And with all of that being said, I will catch you in the next one. Dokkan Assets out. Peace.